Cool. All right, so I was expecting that this conference was going to have a little bit more of graphics people, but I guess it kind of shows a little bit how the web is nowadays. There is a lot of kind of like HTML, JavaScript, kind of like structure or like layout engineers with not so many like graphics in general, like WebGL or Canvas, stuff like that. And especially now that we are going to start to jump into doing probably a lot of VR in the next years, it's going to be interesting how we're going to deal with that. So, how we're going to try to like make it easy so people that don't have much experience with graphics can jump into it. Like developing graphics is complicated, so there's quite a lot of stuff to catch up in order to actually get into VR. But like hopefully like talks like these are going to be helpful for that. Anyway, so who here has tried VR before? And who has developed something for VR before? Using Unity, Unreal 3D, I guess? Yeah, cool. Anyone has done a VR with JavaScript, like WebVR? Good, one person. That kind of shows. All right, so let's try to change that a little bit. Let's start with a little bit of an introduction of like how this all kind of started. There's a little bit more information. There's a little bit more like a background history, but like kind of like overall, this is more or less how things started. So like in July 2014, Google released this device called Google Cardboard, which was basically like a piece of cardboard that you will assemble and you will put your phone inside. And with specific kind of like lenses in the cardboard, you will kind of emulate what companies like Oculus were starting to do, like more like a serious way. Like Google approach was like a kind of like toy approach, but like the good thing of this was like it was like $5, and anyone could like start to like play a little bit with that. For the release of the product, they focused mainly on Android, on doing like a native Android applications. But like while I was working on this team at Google, where we got approached, we were basically doing like demonstrations for JavaScript or demonstrations for the web in general. We got approached by the team that were going to release it if we were interested in doing also some demonstrations using JavaScript and HTML. The thing was that in order to do a virtual reality for this device, it was just a matter of like the same rendering thing that you were doing. Like you have like a 3D scene, you will render it twice, and then you will use kind of like the accelerometer on the phone to kind of see where you were looking. But it was kind of very early on, so we didn't have to like think too much about like we didn't care if it wasn't really perfect. If you were not. You didn't really have like the best experience. Just rendering a little bit like a side to side, like emulating the eyes and a little bit of separation without really like being like correct about it. But that cannot be the trick. Actually, did I connect to the internet? Well, we'll see. So for that, what we did is a website called like VR.com experience. We were like we were doing kind of works. We were doing maintaining kind of like this ChromeExperiments.com website where for like the release of this device, like we just did some kind of like experiments and like hack experiments or like kind of demonstrations for that. But like showing that you could do those things basically just using JavaScript and HTML and running on a website. There was kind of a few hacks that we had to do, like for instance, and we still had to do, like you were gonna have like you had to like display a video on a website. I think you were doing like a 360 video because the video is not in the DOM, like the screen will like fade to black at some point. So you had to like put one video that is kind of in the DOM but invisible, so to kind of basically like trick the phone to stay awake. Otherwise, people will like put the phone and like at some point it will fade out because there was no real interaction with it. For this one, I did this kind of like roller coaster kind of experiment. Like the challenge here was more that this was, I think, a Nexus 4-ish kind of like day. So like also like this kind of also kind of run at the time, there was not even like WebGL on iPhone, so there was no other option that to have to support all Nexus devices. So it was a little bit of a challenge to try to do something that was kind of like, good looking. Wow, we changed the formula for this. This doesn't look very good. And yeah, but in the end, you're basically like rendering for two eyes and like with a little bit of distortion or a little bit like a displacement, and it kind of did the trick. And I think you can get a bit of an experience of like how it is with these emulators. I'm going to talk about it later. If it works, well, maybe I broke it now. Anyway, oh, try again. Right. So yeah, that will be like a little bit how, when you put it on the device, you will be able to look down and will be able to look to your sides and kind of have an experience that I kind of feel that you are there. But this is still inside cardboard, so it's not super immersive, as you want to call it. At the time, this was using the device orientation API, which also was not designed for this at all, but it was what it allowed to, it allowed us to do some kind of get some stuff working. For instance, the device orientation API, I think updated or gave information to JavaScript at something like 20 frames per second or something like that. So if you want to render to 60 frames per second, ideally 90 frames per second, you are basically with a bit of lag all the time, and that kind of creates you seasick kind of feeling. So we had to at least interpolate it. So at least we had 40, and it was on native it was much faster, but on the device orientation, the only thing that we had in JavaScript was device on JavaScript. The only thing was device orientation, and there was we would try to get something working. But yeah, it was all hacky, and it really required something better than not. What they were not the browsers wouldn't think that was a good excuse to improve the device orientation API or give it more frequency. So at the same year, people at Mozilla were more interested, they were working on trying to get this problem solved. Okay, we are not going to hack the device orientation API because it's not for this, and also it's very difficult to support all the devices that were going to be released because every device has a different distortion, and you're going to have to do the distortion yourself in JavaScript, or So in the end, they showed that, or they thought that the best approach was just to do a new API for doing any VR stuff, and in the browser will take care of the distortions for if you're using an Oculus, or you're using an HTC Vive later. Every device has a different distortion, or you're using especially on phones, and you're using cardboard. Every screen is different, so it requires some adjustments. And from JavaScript, we cannot do that. So the WebVR API first was solving where to render what, kind of the two frames, and also what they were doing there, they also worked on a better, a higher frame rate resolution for the zero rotation, because basically you want to have at least really 90 frames per second as possible. So they set up this kind of team at Mozilla, and I helped them a little bit on the feed loads. The demo that they were showing, or the kind of they did a website just to showcase the kind of things that you were going to be able to do. Seems like this one is loading. But anyway, it was basically a landscape. I'm going to try again. No. Anyway. Basically on that one, I basically help them because, again, you need to render as fast as possible. So you need to do a lot of tricks to make things render for instance, in that case, it was a landscape with a sea and a reflective sea. So in the end, it was easier to render the mountains on the top and then duplicate it at the bottom and then have some things in the middle than now try to actually make the reflection kind of code. and things like that. It made it like much faster, like it will make it as more like a less latency for the user to look around. But at the time, all this stuff was like what you would call like a look around VR, like everything like cardboard gear VR and like Take-Two-ish, and almost the new like Oculus is all just looking around. You cannot, you can see like a 360 video, but like you cannot move and everything. But that was the first step, like at least that was the what started to get people excited about VR, just being able to like look at any place at any point. And you could do some things, like especially you're doing a actual 3D movie, you can have like some things wait until you look at them to like continue the story. Like you're a little bit limited if you are doing a 360 video because you cannot stop parts, like you may miss the action. But it definitely has potential, and especially like you can still do stuff with cardboard and gear VR for these things. So with the API starting to, that was landing on browsers, but it was like experimental. I started for like this Three.js, in case people don't know what Three.js, anyone knows what WebGL is? Or like, oh, everyone doesn't know what Three.js is? Doesn't? One? Okay. Well, it's a quick explanation. Basically, with browsers nowadays, you can render. You can use the graphics card on your computer to render like polygons like really fast from JavaScript. But like the API is a little bit too complicated, so there's a layer on top of it that I'm developing called Three.js that basically allows to like, you want to have like a cube, but you want to have like a model, and everything is the development is much faster. Otherwise, with WebGL, you have to deal with only numbers and like matrices and stuff like that. It's much more difficult. So for the library, I started developing examples that will show. It will allow you to do. It will basically wrap the API, the WebVR API, so you could like start to play with it. So this example, for instance, it was. I think with the new version of the second version of the cardboard, it will allow you to use the button that you have on the side, or like to actually click on the screen. So now it was a bit better than before. Like before, with the first cardboard, the button that you had on the side, it will do some like hack on the hardware that only like the native like Android were able to access, and JavaScript we won't be able to access that. So like with the second version of the cardboard, what they did was that the button was actually transmitting the finger to the screen. So that way from JavaScript we could like also like click the screen. So whenever like if you're running this on cardboard, then whenever you click the screen, you will be like throwing like objects into the view. So that was just one example that just added to the library so people could start to play with it. Then like everyone was doing also 360 videos. So let's try this again. Actually, this may not work. Anyway, for 360 videos, basically you need to render so you have a camera that records the world around you. But like if you want to have like a much better experience, you need to have like an output that gives you emulates basically the two eyes looking around. So this is difficult to do like in actual. With a normal camera, but if you have like something like a 3D Studio Max or like Maya, then they did like a way that you can like actually render the scene from as if it was the like two eyes moving around the scene or like spinning around the scene. So that way you end up with the same video, but it's actually two versions of the same video. And like I had to like modify the library so it will allow you to render the same video, like split it and say like, okay, I'm rendering to the left eye and I'm rendering to the right eye, and that way like it will actually look like, you see this on the device, you will actually feel that you are pretty good experience. Like you feel like that you see the depth on this scene. But again, this was only kind of like moving around. You can only like look around. The HTC Vive got released 2016, so this year. I think it took me. Yeah, like it took me like maybe like a couple of months to actually be able to try. Like people, as soon as it got released and people had it, like people got super excited about it. But like I didn't have it, and I didn't have like a powerful machine enough to play it. But as soon as I got to like to play it, like I spent like a friend of mine just let me play with it, and I spent like probably 2 hours at the beginning inside it, trying all the things. Like there is still brush, and there's like many other kind of like things that you will kind of give you like a pretty good experience. But basically, the Vive, for those of you that know, is like the same kind of like device, but like it also has a two. They call it lighthouses, but you can think as webcams in a way that you can put on your house, and that way they can track where your face is in space, so you can walk around. And also you have two controllers, which is also very important, and they can track the two controllers, and you can like interact with the space. So like from being able to look around without really much interaction to like go to be able to like move around and like move stuff around, that was like a pretty huge step, like like from last year to this year. And that had made like a like I think last year they were kind of developing the API for those devices where it was kind of like limited, but they were aware that this was going to be released, so they were still like kind of moving around. And this year they have been refactoring the WebVR API like much more to like adapt to like because whenever they release this, like you start to think like what you need to try to like you're defining or you're designing an API with something that you actually don't know how the VR world is going to evolve. Anyway, so for this one, I spent a while, but like on the device. But the most exciting part was when I got to like there were people developing the WebVR API in itself, but also there were people like contributing to the library the code that is necessary to make it work. So as soon as like I just plug everything together, and I actually got to see like one scene that I'm very familiar with, it was like, okay, this is, I spent quite a while just looking at that guy that I have seen many times. He's a material, like it's a test object that we use for like testing materials, but like in this case, for the first time I could actually look like pretty closely, like all the details of the object, like, like I couldn't really see it like with the mouse basically. So the problem was that I still didn't have a Vive myself, a device myself, neither a computer fast enough to be able to run it. And I also, at the time, I was also traveling quite a bit, so I couldn't really like buy, like, even if I can afford it, I couldn't really buy it because, like, I cannot carry it because it's way too big. So I came up with a friend of mine, like this Spite at the end. He was working on doing like on Chrome extensions, and I suggested like the idea of like how about like doing a Chrome extension. Like one good thing about like a JavaScript is that basically we can emulate, or we can override any kind of API. Like we could override the device orientation API, or we can like gamepad or whatever. You can say like whenever you call like navigator get gamepad or something, you can change that function to another function, and then you're basically like doing your own kind of like API yourself. So the idea was to like step in between like the WebVR API and do like a Chrome extension, so you could like if people are sending like improvement to the code in Three.js, to the VR, I could at least test it, because otherwise I'm just like someone is sending code, but I cannot really test it myself because I don't have the device. So it actually took, like in a day we already had something working. So here, let's see if this works. So with this extension, now I'm able to like just move the camera around and kind of like see as if it was, it's obviously not the same experience as like actually being there, but like you get like a, for debugging, basically it gives you like a much better, it gives you an option to, for like, even if you wanna like, depending, like you can put the camera in some places and test stuff without having to put the device all the time. But like this, to me, like this seems like super powerful, like stuff that, like for like, because it's all part of the web, it was very easy to do for us, in our case. So this is more or less kind of the situation as it is, like kind of the development in general, like in as examples for Three.js, and like this is the situation more or less at the time. Like actually, this actually is a little bit updated. Like on a meetup last week, someone at Apple was kind of saying that they were, they were not like making it obvious, or they were not making it like directly, but they were saying that they were also interested in WebVR. So I guess the last one is Opera, that is kind of based on Chrome, so you can kind of like guess that everyone is interested into it. And the last one is the Samsung, the browser inside the Samsung VR that is already like is the first one that you don't even need to like download a special version. You launch the Samsung. Actually, yeah, you need to like enable a flag, but this is the only browser that is kind of stable on a device that you just need to enable a flag and you already have it working. Okay, so this is a coding conference, so we're going to do a little bit of code to kind of see how this works. Is the code big enough? Well, we can try. How do you do this? Is that okay? Okay. Anyway, so this is, as I say here, this is kind of like the base of like how to do basic like kind of VR scene, or like how you like get something to work, like to play with VR. But like in this case, I'm using 3 because it just makes it much simpler. So in case you haven't done any like 3.js code before, basically is you need to do like create a scene where you're going to put your stuff. You need to create like a camera, which is the one that you're going to use to render the scene. So you have like parameters like the field of view and like kind of the aspect ratio and like from where and like how near and how far. And then you here you this is how you create like a box basically. You need to create like first the definition of how the box, the geometry of the box itself, and then the material will be the how it's going to be rendered. And then you create a mesh that gets like a geometry and the material, and then you place it. We're placing it a little bit like half a meter on top of the floor because the box itself is like 1 meter height. And then we need to do like add a renderer, which basically Three.js had like a different renders, but like nowadays the one that is being used the most is the WebGL one. But yeah, like basically the render is the one that is going to like get the scene, and using the camera that you're passing is going to actually render into what it will like here is a DOM element, which is actually a canvas, which is what you add to your DOM basically. So with that, we ended up with something like this. Just in this case, like a column. The grid is because I'm adding like we have this grid helper. Otherwise, the cube will be like floating, and it will be a little bit. It will just look pretty much like a plane. So if we want to add animation to it, for instance, if we want to like get stuff like moving, then we need to have like, for instance, instead of calling like render once, we put it like inside a animate function, or like whatever you want to call it, and then we use a request animation frame, which basically is like an API from the browser that allows you to render the next time the screen refreshes, basically. Otherwise, with JavaScript, you don't know when is the next time the screen refreshes. And so in this case, like we are every frame we are rotating, or we are setting the Y rotation of the mesh using the current time. So it's basically going to be spinning a little bit. Exciting. So from here, like what it is that we need to do to the code in order to go into VR. It's actually pretty simple, like compared to like what you need to wrap in order to have like actual 3D being rendered. In order to like what you need to wrap from WebVR is pretty simple concepts at this point. So basically, we need to right now we're rendering from this camera that is basically set like half a meter from the floor, and then a little bit backwards. So we basically want to modify where that position is so it matches where the user's person head is. For that, we have the VR controls, where you pass the camera that you want to like. Basically, is the camera that you want to attach to the user's head. And this is not really built in. Like this is something that is outside of the library, but like because we're iterating a lot to those files still. But like yeah, it's an example. So you can just include it into your project, and you can just use it directly. And also we want to render not to like, like we need to render instead of one view, we need to render 2 views. But like the WebVR API is going to tell us where those 2 views are. So we also need to wrap that API, and for that we have the VR effect, where we pass the render, and instead of rendering with the render, we use the effect render. And like it's kind of it's the same API but yeah, I may modify this at some point, but this is how it's working so far. So with that, oops, oh, it's remembering where we left the camera. It's remembering this. Okay, so for this, okay, you should be able to control this. So that's kind of like, usually it's tricky to, I could like try to connect like, even like this is a MacBook Air, I could try to connect some like Oculus DK2, but it's not that different to like emulate it than not to like show you like, yeah, it's working. But for that, let's see. Yeah, that's pretty much like what you need. Let me show you also with a better feeling. Oh, wow, that's big. So that's, again, I'm going to explain the player later, but this is more or less how it will, using a session recorded from before, like from myself, like with the head, like this is how, the scene that you set up just by adding those things is already rendering. You don't have to do anything else. And it's missing a button that we usually have. So at the bottom, that it will also detect if your browser can support like VR or not, and then so you can enter, and then it will do the 2 views directly and render it into the device. But yeah, that's pretty much all you need to do. You can also, you don't want to code, you can also do it on the editor that it's basically sitting here. And let's see if I can put this back to. Okay. So in this case, all right. We create a box here. We create, that's going to be annoying, plain, spin it a bit. Well, we're using, we can use lights here directly instead. So we have these direct lights of this, and just to like kind of match a little bit what the other one was looking. It was using this material. But yeah, like from here, you can already kind of like preview how the whole thing looks like. And you can actually export them into a zip file with, whenever you like publish from here, you can are already creating like an HTML file with the JavaScript and everything that you need. So like you can actually even like add, like for instance, in this case, we'll need to add one script that will move the cube, so it will be this. Actually, I haven't done this for a while. I think it's something like this. Yeah, okay. But yeah, like this is kind of like a tiny, small, kind of like Unity 3D kind of thing, but super basic. Like mainly it was like for exporting objects and scene and like previewing stuff. But like it kind of become a little bit more developed. And from here you have on the project you have the VR kind of like checkbox that also includes the VR controls and VR effects. So then you get the 2 views already. So if we connect the device, you can do the same thing again. We can see the scene all from there, like without leaving the browser, just working. As long as you have like a new version or like a latest version of like a development version of browsers that supports WebVR, then you will be able to do all this stuff. Okay. So that's kind of like the version. You have the 2 options. So as a kind of like second part, that was kind of like me trying to develop like VR. Like I was really interested in doing like VR things over the last since like the HTC Vive like got released. Like with the cardboard and stuff, like you can do things, but it's not super exciting. But like whenever you can start building your own worlds, it gets pretty exciting. So again, I couldn't like do anything because I didn't have a Vive. So in August, last month, yeah, I got to. I was traveling into like in San Francisco, and some friends actually allowed me to like let me use the device. and so I could like develop for a bit. Like particularly this friend of mine, like John O'Brandel, he was leaving his place for a week, and he was like, "Yeah, sure, you just come every day, and you can do whatever with the device." So I set myself this kind of like this VR week where I'm gonna go to his place and try to do something every day, and then like put it on Twitter. In a way, it was also to kind of show that it was pretty the potential that it had. And for these, I'll need to like play videos instead. So, all right, let's see. So previously, actually, the previous month, there is the VR kind of like headset. That's what the WebVR kind of API does. But also there is these controllers that are the Vive controllers. That for that we also needed to add some APIs, and right now they're adding the APIs into the gamepad API as if it was an actual controller or something like that. But it also comes with a pose, so you know where in space and rotation it is. For that, we also have like a wrapper on top of it, and with events whenever you're clicking and all that stuff. So that's something that I did in July, and then like this month with all that set up, it was more a matter of like actually playing with all these and see what I could do. So I'm gonna show like some experiments that I did a little bit. So this was like the first kind of day, and the most basic thing to do whenever you like start messing with it is just adding basically whenever you are pressing the controller, you are adding one box with the rotation of the controller, and then that way you kind of do this kind of like abstract kind of like sculpting or drawing tool. Then the next step, like we also have like a lot of physics libraries in JavaScript. So the next step is to add, let's see, to add that. So whenever you're like clicking, you are dropping cubes instead. So they all have like physics. And I actually find out that whenever you're pressing that on the floor, which is also at the beginning, you put it there. When you start dropping cubes on the floor, it creates these kind of columns. That, it was kind of interesting. But yeah, like somehow, like what I wanted to do, like at the end of the day, I wanted to like post like something like this is what I did today on kind of WebVR, like on Twitter, and somehow like in order to do that, even if I had something working, it will require me a little bit like testing things because I don't want to show something that is not appealing, or like I will need to like explore and see what actually will be interesting. So I think this was the second day. Some years ago, I did an application. This is something I wanted to try. Like I had like a lot of ideas, things that I wanted to try while develop while in VR. So some years ago, I developed this Canvas 2D, like HTML5 Canvas application that basically, whenever you're drawing in a 2D space, whenever you're drawing on the screen, is looking to all the other points that you have drawn and connect them if they're close enough. So that way, it will create this kind of like shading for you automatically. In this case, I was curious to see like, how does this look like in 3D? In 3D is not such a good idea because one thing is doing it in 2D. In 2D, you're just drawing, and you don't have to. You need to remember the points, but you don't need to. When you draw in, like in Photoshop, you don't need to redraw everything that you have drawn every time. But like here, everything that we're drawing, we need to keep it and redraw every frame because the user may move the head. So eventually, you will draw something and it will crash because it's just too many points. Like it gets kind of choppy, and actually, whenever you are inside VR and the whole thing gets choppy, it gets pretty. It messes with your head a little bit. Someone was saying the joke that like this is VR right now is a little bit like when people were messing with like not nuclear weapons, but like the science behind it. They didn't realize that they will get like cancer and stuff. People with VR is a little bit like, we can just move the eyes. This is great. Yeah, it actually can hurt your head at some point. So for this, like in this one, like I spent quite a bit like trying to see if I could like come up with something kind of attractive. I didn't want to show something on Twitter that like people will be too focused on the fact that it's ugly instead of looking at and not being able to think like, this is actually running in the browser and this is all JavaScript. And so in the end, like I don't know, I spent like hours trying to come up with some drawing, but like, this is a little bit like, it's kind of weird. This is kind of like when you are drawing on a paper, or like scribbling on a paper, but like, because it's on 3D, it's inside the VR, somehow you feel that it needs to be much better looking or more serious, but you have this kind of pressure. Or maybe because all the people doing VR drawings are pretty good these days. Still, that was kind of like interestingly looking. Then I tried adding colors to it and see, how they will look like. But somehow, like, I felt that this path was not, I was starting to like see the limitations to it. Like, I know that at some point it will get to too many points, and there was no easy way to like for me to optimize that, to like allow the user to draw even more. Oh yeah, that's a funny car. Yay. So I think that was the second day. This is the end of the second day. The third day was kind of interesting. This technique called marching cubes, which is, you can picture it as like kind of like you do like a Minecraft world with all like little voxels, and some voxels are like filled, like it has like it's like a terrain, or some voxels are not filled, like it's just space. So you imagine that like as being like a grid in space, and then there's this algorithm that does like a reconstruction of the geometry of whatever is filled or not. That's pretty much what this algorithm does. And so basically, I was setting like in virtual space, I was setting a virtual grid that was kind of like, and then I was matching it to the virtual space. So then the way you end up with like this kind of like strange effect. Like at this point, like this right now doesn't mean anything to you probably, but like for me, like this basically means that I managed to align the control of the device, the position of the device with the simulation of the marching cubes. So with that, then I can start adding points into that simulation, and I ended up doing this kind of like drawing, kind of like GUI kind of thing. Like every frame that I'm doing something, the whole geometry is being recalculated and drawing. And by adding just the shine effect, you get this kind of like GUI kind of effect. And yeah, that was one of like kind of the first test. This one actually was kind of strange because it's very, even if it doesn't look realistic, somehow it's very physical. And like I even like had some, at some point after drawing all the time, you get tired, and I even had like the reflex of like trying to like rest myself in one of the things that I draw. Somehow like this doesn't really happen with like things like, at least to me, it didn't happen with something like Chillbrush. That is, that what you're drawing is, you feel that it's fake, but this somehow, because it's more like, it has a volume, maybe I kind of felt that way. And then I will take out the headset, and I will still remember that thing, my brain will still think like, oh, don't sit up because that thing is still up on top of you. So for this one, I think I did spend quite a while trying to, I think this was one of the ones that I kept repeating. Also there is like, I was very aware of the limitations of in this case, in this algorithm. Like this works, like maybe right now you think that you can draw anywhere, but like no, this is actually, it has a limit of like space. I can duplicate them, but like I know that if I draw a little bit too much, I'm not gonna draw anymore, because that's the end of the simulation of the whole like triangulation basically. So for this one, like again, it's the pressure, like trying to do something that is kind of like attractive, but you're not an artist. Then there was this one. I think this is the one that I kind of ended up. Oh, was it this? Oh no, this one so I made it so with one controller you're adding, how you call it, like mass into the space, and with the other one you're removing it. But the idea was it was working fine, but somehow it's not what I was kind of expecting. Like you can remove mass and then try to draw, but like the mass is negative in that space, and then you're actually not drawing, and it was a little bit tricky to control. But it actually was like pretty interesting. Like it's something similar to I think what Oculus is doing with Medium, but like Oculus is doing more like a thing that you're drawing in here and you're moving around. Like this was more like actually drawing into the whole space kind of thing. This one was kind of you'll get to draw like this chair and then like try to do, all this was like exploration to try to find something. Like sometimes during exploration you will find interesting things that you couldn't really think like when programming. And in this case, also I had to do, I hadn't yet like find out that I could use the controllers had like a D-pad kind of thing to that they use for scrolling mainly. But I didn't know that that was accessible from the Gamepad API. So in the end, like you know, that if I wanted to change colors, like whenever you're in that space, you basically have those two controllers and the trigger. So I just made it that whenever you press the D-pad thing on the top, it will actually change to a random color, and then it will draw with whatever color it is. Like I didn't have that much control. Turns out that random color is one of my friend's favorite feature because he can like put it very close to his face and see random colors. Like after spending all this time doing it, that's what he liked. But yeah, and then like this was kind of funny character. Then after that, let's see. Yeah, I think the problem also with that algorithm is that again, it's kind of limited. You have one space. You don't have like an unlimited resolution. What most of the people that are doing like drawing applications, for VR in general, they use an algorithm where they use the approach where whenever you're like drawing, you're basically drawing triangles to where you are painting. So that's what I kind of like focused the last day. I tried to do something more like that. So in this case, it's just like drawing, basically like creating a plane, whatever the cursor is. And this is actually a little bit tricky. So it's not even like, as you can see, there is no shadows. So they are actually perfectly perpendicular to the floor. Because otherwise it's kind of tricky to like do that rotation. But like here, like again, I'm like kind of like exploring the kind of things that you could do with it. Like to try to like, again, like kind of share with people. I think it's this one, the one with chips. Yeah, this is probably actually like another thing of while doing mainly the drawing applications is that you don't remember exactly how the real room where you are is. So there were many times that I was drawing something and I was hitting the lamp, and you could see like, oh, this is playing that clunk. Okay, I need to start the video again, and that could be like the middle of it. I'm surprised I didn't get to break the lamp. But like on that one, it was on that previous video was like the approach was instead of like drawing like a plane, it was try to draw a tube, like a cylinder across whatever. Like I'm moving my hand, and there is some like this is kind of the last kind of code that I have, but like there are some complications in that approach because there's some like math issues where you cannot have like do like it will twist basically in some parts, and I still need to like solve that a little bit. But yeah, like I think I don't know if there is anyone. Yeah, like also like having that, I also thought like okay, so if I have this thing, what it is that I can do that, for instance, Sildra's cannot do. And by having that, like instead of like having to draw like one circle, what about just like one cylinder? What about like drawing many of them at the same time and exploring like different kind of like brushes in this case? And in the end, like I just paid like everything that I was doing. I put it like I open sourced it. I put it as examples of the of like Three.js, so people could like evolve into that. And like next things will be like adding like exported. In this case, will be like exporting for OVJs or something like that. Like so people can join to it and like export to their own, so they can modify that on their own software. And this was kind of the last thing that I got to do while having access to a device, and it was mainly because there were people that had issues by like with the math of like grabbing one object and moving it around because the matrix is a little bit confusing. So I also like ended up like doing one example so people can like use that like and start like interacting with the world much easier. And yeah, like here's trying to do something with it. But yeah, that was pretty much the week, and like everything is already like on the repo, like on the Three.js repo, GitHub. And something else that I needed, and kind of the last thing that I needed is that I was realizing is that when I was doing the drawing application, there were times that I will like draw something, and I'll notice that it was kind of like slow. So it was difficult for me to. It's difficult to debug these things. So whenever you're drawing, and you notice something weird, then you need to take out the classes, like modify some code, like put the classes again, draw again, like, and it's not like the best workflow basically. So I come up also with the idea on top of the emulating the API. I come up with the idea like how about like we like also emulate, we record, which is what I've been using. We record a session of in this case, like myself, using the device and the controllers, and then we can like replay it. So basically, like that allows me to like play something. And actually, when I did this, like, and then I can even like play this on the MacBook Air, which is like right now what we're seeing is just not a video. This is actually being done with from MacBook Air. And that way, that allowed me to like, while this is running, I can debug it. I can see what's happening whenever I create those lines. And it actually like took me like seconds to see where the actual bug that I was having was, like compared to like like the whole like workflow. It was like pretty. It was pretty optimized in that way. That way also like it's pretty useful to not only for this. Oh, let's see if I can move to the next one. Not only for this, for like for any other. Maybe I think it's sculpt one. For like any other, you can also use this for like you are drawing or you are like modeling a 3D scene, but you want to make sure that what you're modeling is not too, it doesn't get into the user. You basically have a recording of someone walking around the scene, you model something, and then you're like run this kind of simulation. And that turns out that is something that people also like have been using like as a kind of thing. Like so, this kind of a thing, or this kind of a recording session kind of thing. Yeah, I don't know. This is. You can still like you can see how I'm putting the headset and reaching and starting to do to use the device. Well, yeah, like here is recording the headset, the controllers, and everything that you're pressing, and then you can. If you wanted, you could do like the experiment with different other brushes if you needed to. And I think that's about it. You want to have more information about what WebVR is, you can go to WebVR info. And this is what I have so far. Thank you very much.